Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dottie Vance, and I'll be taking you through today's session. I'm joined virtually also by some of my colleagues who may speak up during the Q&A portion to help provide any clarity when it's needed on this topic. In addition, I have my producer, Nathaniel Brown, who's going to help me monitor your questions and make sure that we get things covered for you today. So this afternoon, we're here to talk about winter readiness for scheduling coordinators, and we have a lot of great information that we're going to be sharing with you today. Additionally, to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted on our website sometime after, so you can review it in the future, or for those who are unable to attend today's call. These slides are currently posted on our training center under training modules, as well as Nat will put a link in the chat to these training slides. So if you'd like to follow along, you'll have access to that as well. Now, before we dive into the material itself, I did just want to go over some housekeeping. So just as a reminder, please keep yourself on mute until we get to the question and answer portion of today. This is just going to help with background noise and make sure that we run smoothly. Speaking of questions, you do have a couple options if you want to ask questions during today's training. We'll have stopping points. So again, after something that we cover, I'll stop and open it up for questions. You can either use the raised hand icon feature in WebEx, and that's going to alert to us that you'd like to verbally ask your question. Or as we go through the training, if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, we'll be sure to answer that for you as well. So now that we've gone over housekeeping, I just want to review the agenda with you today and what we're going to be going through. So first, we're going to be talking about some key takeaways from winter events. We have two that we'll specifically be talking about. Then we're going to discuss the CAISO emergency playbook. I'll talk in detail about what that looks like, the different responsibilities, what you can expect to see. The next thing we're going to do is walk through each of the EEA notification levels in detail. I have an example we're going to walk through together so we can see how it plays out. We're also going to learn the process to subscribe and unsubscribe to notifications. It's pretty straightforward, which is great. And then I'll also point you to some great resources that you can use and additional information once we leave today's training. Now, before we get into it, I did want to open up a poll, and so the poll is going to pop up on your screen. It'll be where your chat, your participants is, and I'll open that here in just 1 second. But I just want to gauge and see how familiar everyone is with the term winter readiness. So I'll open it, so you should be able to start responding back. But the first one is A, you're extremely familiar. B, you're moderately familiar. C, somewhat familiar, maybe you know a little bit about the topic. And then D, you're not familiar at all. You have yet to learn this. And I see answers are starting to come in. We have about 6 more seconds left to get those answers in. Perfect. Okay, so as we can see, it looks like a lot of folks are in between the moderately and the somewhat familiar with this topic. We have a few that are not familiar at all, which is exciting because this training today, hopefully by the end, you can move up to either that somewhat, maybe even moderate. And then we do have a few extremely familiar, so I'm excited to see what you take away from this training and what feedback you may have as we go through it. But this topic has a lot of information for you today, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So thank you for participating in that poll. So like I mentioned, the first thing that we want to talk about today is to review the key takeaways from some winter events. Specifically, when we want to talk about them because they happened in their real life situations and how it can show winter events when we go through it, either at our ISO or other ISOs. The first one that we'll talk about today is from the February 2021 winter event. So this could be more familiar with folks as it was covered pretty broadly in news sources. So what happened here is a severe cold weather event between February 8th through the 20th of 2021 impacted our bulk electric system, the BES, reliability in Texas and South Central United States. So when you think of that, that impacts ERCOT, SPP, and MISO South. Some statistics that were pulled from that include more than 4.5 million people in Texas lost power. And specifically, some of those lasted for 4 days. Other folks had power without power for 6 days and extremely below freezing temperatures. Additionally, the event was the 4th coldest weather event in the last 10 years to jeopardize the BES reliability. With a combination of over 20,000 megawatts of manual firm load shed, the event was the largest controlled firm load shed event in U.S. history, and was the 3rd largest in quantity of outage megawatt load after the August 2003 Northeast blackout and the August 1996 West Coast blackout. You'll also see that winter events, while they also impact folks, can also impact the economy. So in Texas, you'll see that estimated losses were between $80 to $130 billion. Now, because of this event, regulators, FERC, NERC, and regional entity staff wrote an over 300-page event report, which I have linked here on the slide. In that report, it talks about the extreme cold weather, grid operations, preparedness, and coordination, and how their primary purpose is to address the reliability related to the findings in this action. The project scope addressed 9 recommendations for new or enhanced NERC reliability standards that were proposed in this report. So you can see here the significant impact that can happen when a winter event takes a turn in the unfortunate direction. And again, I have linked at the bottom if you would like to review that report that FERC, NERC, and regional entities put together. That's where I pulled this information from, as well as they have graphics and charts that go into way more details in the numbers on what they found when they were doing their report. Now, the next winter event I want to talk about may hit a little bit closer to home because it happened this year, and regionally it was near us. So an extreme cold weather hit the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rocky Mountain states over the Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend. So that was the January 13th through 15th of 2024. The temperatures in many areas were 20 to 40 degrees below normal, which is extremely cold. And in fact, it was found that part of Northwest Montana set a record low of -48. So very unlike what it normally is, very extreme is how it was reported. And what we did for this is we looked at the communication. So from NERC, they recommended to evaluate the energy. They worked with folks to really make sure that they are going to be reliable. And then the ISO worked with folks to send emails. We did the assistance energy transfers with WEIM entities if they opted in. They sent out the energy emergency alerts, the EEAs. And then I have linked here a notice that was sent out at the end, kind of wrapping up this event, that if you wanted to go back and look at, you can too. And this event really shows what happens when we work together and we collaborate, and we follow through with the emergency playbook, as well as we know the different EEA levels. And as we're in December going into January, this is such a great time for us to just review it, have it top of mind as we enter into next year. So now that we covered some real life events, some real winter events that happened, and we saw what can happen when things go certain ways, I want to go into the emergency playbook and make sure folks feel comfortable with what that looks like as we go into next year. So as we break apart the emergency playbook, you're going to see it's broken down to as we get closer to an event. So currently, if you look at this slide, it shows 4 to 7 days out. There are several things that the ISO is going to be doing in coordination with external entities as well as customers. And that first thing you'll see is operational assessments, meaning if we have an extreme temperature event, operationally, we're going to be monitoring for demand forecasts, we're going to assess resource adequacy, we're going to look at system conditions, the weather, and then any other potential grid impacts and plan for those next steps. Now, if we move down to operational coordination with external entities at that 4 to 7 days out, this is something that could impact you. In regards to this section, and it really depends on the actual and potential system conditions, outreach and coordination may occur either with the governor's office or to our long start strategic reserve resource scheduling coordinators. You'll also see listed here that we could consider the need for the Department of Energy 202C orders, and if government agency assistance could be needed. Again, we're looking operationally if that's something that we might need to consider. And then you'll also see that we may issue an extreme temperature heads up, whether that be on our website or social media, so our Twitter or LinkedIn, letting customers know that we do see an extreme winter event on the horizon and what we're doing to prepare for that. So as we move closer to this weather event in the emergency playbook, now we're about 1 to 4 days out of this event. So you'll see very similarly, except maybe we've geared up a little bit. We've tightened up. So operationally, we're going to continue to review and validate the most current information on the system conditions. Remember, those include resource adequacy, the weather forecast, and any other potential factors that could impact our grid. With regards to coordination with external entities, this is where we see it really start to expand. So we really start to bring folks in, initiate communication, coordinate things as well. So the ISO is really focused here on preparing customers for possible conservation efforts. We'll reach out to our water agencies, so California Department of Water Resources, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. You see the Emergency Load Reduction Board, the ELRP, as well as RC West regulatory agencies. And then you'll also see that we could, if we need, start to coordinate the DOE 202C orders, emergency supply above approved permit and or the generation interconnection agreement, and then those governor's office proclamations or executive orders. Now, if we move down to public and customer communication, you could see that the ISO may issue a restricted maintenance operations, also known as an RMO, which here in a couple slides, I'll talk more in detail about what an RMO is and what you can expect when it would be issued. You'll see that it could be issued on the mobile app. Maybe it's through market notification system, email, today's Outlook. Again, later in today's presentation, I'm going to show you how to subscribe to some of these, as well as I would highly recommend that you download our ISO Today mobile app. It is such a useful app. It really connects you to things like this, gives you all the information in one location. So I would highly recommend that if you don't already. And then publicly, you'll see we could post the Department of Energy orders, or similarly, we could post the governor office proclamations and orders. So as we move down to now, we're 1 day out. So we've reached out, we've been coordinating, we've been communicating, we've been looking operationally about what's going on. This is going to look very similar. You're going to see operationally, we're reviewing and validating the day ahead market results. We want to make sure we have the most current information, that we're prepared, we're following this winter event. We're coordinating with folks. So again, very similar to the last slide that I talked about. You'll see RC West, as well as the neighboring VAs, utilities. And then for public and customer communications, this is when you might start seeing that Flex Alert or the EEA Watch, which, lucky for you, I'll be going into more detail about those two topics here in just a moment. And you can see that on several different platforms, whether it be that mobile app we talked about, through email, news release, our daily briefing, social media, and then of course the Flex Alert itself. So now we continue and we're on operating day. So we were far back, we've been planning for a week, we've been communicating, coordinating, making sure that everyone is feeling comfortable as we're going into operation day itself. You'll see we are reviewing the actual and potential system conditions. This is including which energy emergency alert, that EEA notification, will need to go out. And again, we're going to review that here later on. Externally, it's very similar to the days before. You'll see that we could be issuing the RMO, as well as posting those proclamations. And then publicly, you're going to see a lot of communication. So you're going to see we're going to issue the Flex Alerts or the EEAs, depending on what's happening that day, as well as whenever things start to all clear and we start going back to normal, we will communicate that as well to folks. So I want to pause here. Again, in just a moment, I'm going to be going into all the different EEA levels with you, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into an example. But I want to stop and see if folks have any questions about the emergency playbook. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Nathaniel, and you can let me know if there's any hands raised and call on them or any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Dottie. Yeah, chat is probably easiest because most accessible, but if you'd like to speak up, oh, here we go. We have Harold. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you could state where you're coming from as well.
I'm Harold coming from Pattern Energy, and my question is, when the RMOs come out, I noticed last year they would come out for like the north or the south. What is the boundary between the north and the south?
Oh, so sorry, I was double muted. So I'll pass it over to Brian if you're on the call, and you can add to that question.
Thanks. So just to make sure I got it right, the question was about the differentiating between RMO for the north versus RMO for the south. Is that what the question was?
That is correct. I just kind of want to know where that boundary was.
Oh, where the boundary is? Okay. Yeah. In general sense, it's usually between the PG&E system and the SoCal Edison system. So Midway is kind of the northernmost 500 kV substation for PG&E, and say Vincent is kind of that was the southernmost for PG&E, and the northernmost for Edison is around Vincent or Whirlwind. So that's usually the separation between north and south is PG&E system and Southern Cal Edison system.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All right, any other questions? Go ahead and raise a hand or put it in the chat.
Okay, so I don't think that there's any other questions at this time, Nat, but I also did just want to make a clarification. I saw when I was going through the slides, specifically on slide 10, and I'm going to update this and I'll post it on the website, and when I email it out, you'll get the updated slides. But for the operational coordination with external entities, you'll notice that under coordinate the following, the WEIM entities can opt in for assistance emergency transfers. I meant to put assistance, assistance energy transfers, not emergency. So I'll update that acronym and I'll get that posted and out to you, but I did just want to call that out as if you've already saved these slides off, I'll need to make that correction. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be talking about today is I want to walk through each of the EEA notification levels in detail. I want to talk about what you'll do, what the ISO is going to do, just so you know what that looks like going forward. So as we go through, you'll see that these are the different levels, and I want to call attention to the first three grayish looking boxes. That's the Flex Alert, the Restricted Maintenance Operations, and the Transmissions Emergency. Now, I just want to call those out because they're not technically part of the EEA family, but we do issue them before we go into those, and I'll talk about what that looks like and where you can find that information. You'll next see we're going to talk about what an EEA watch is, the 1, 2, and then I want to call out that the EEA 3 is going to be separated into two different levels. You'll see that one is preparing for the potential rotating outages, and one is going to be that firm load interruption. And I'll have more details here once we get to that section. So this first part I'll talk to you about today is the Flex Alert. So ideally, this is something that's issued in the day ahead, the 1 to 2 days in advance. And it's that call to our customers to voluntarily conserve electricity when the ISO anticipates using nearly all available resources to meet demand. Now, when you think of a Flex Alert, it probably comes closer to mind when you think of summer. I know for the ISO, it can get really hot, so we have a lot of summer readiness and preparedness. However, I did just want to call out that Flex Alerts could potentially also be used for a winter event. So it's not just something strictly for summer. You could And it just, again, depends on grid operations and what we see a flex alert for a winter event. And again, ideally, this is something issued in the day ahead. The next thing you're going to see is that restricted maintenance operation. So this is when high loads are anticipated. So the ISO participants are cautioned to avoid taking grid assets offline for routine maintenance, just to ensure that all generators and transmission lines are available. Again, the way we want this posted is given in advance, that day ahead if possible. Again, it just depends with those grid operations. And then the last thing you'll see on this is the transmission emergency. You'll note, different from the two above, this is something that'll occur in real time. And it's the declaration for any event threatening or limiting transmission grid capability, including line or transformer overload or loss. And this could be something that's system-wide or it could be local. It really just depends on that transmission emergency. So now that we have an understanding of these three, let's go into that EEA family that I was talking about. And also, I did want to call out, whenever we see and we're getting ready for an event and you see notifications, maybe a flex alert came through or an RMO, you as a scheduling coordinator, if you're working and you're seeing that your resource may have a difficult time starting up, please communicate with the ISO as soon as possible. And that's just to help make sure that maybe we have to start in advance of an event or plan accordingly to make sure that you and your group feels prepared going into this. So if we break down the different EEA levels here, you'll see the EEA watch. Essentially what that is it's a day ahead analysis that is forecasting 1 or more hours in the day ahead are going to be that energy deficient. So at this point, we expect that all available generation projected to be in use. So for that reason, they're typically issued in advance in the day ahead by 1500. The next thing you'll see is an EEA1, which is very similar to an EEA watch, but this is going to be that real-time analysis that's forecasting 1 or more of the hours being energy deficient. You'll see it means the same thing, where all available generation in are projected to be in use. So we can ask that you prepare for the dispatch of demand response resources. Again, just like how I said, it's the real-time analysis. Ideally, this is issued in that real time. And then the last one on this slide is that EEA2. So this basically means that CAISO is no longer able to provide expected energy requirements and is energy deficient. So at this point, load management procedures are going to be in effect. And as this is happening, it's also going to be issued in that real time. So now that we have an understanding of an EEA Watch 1 and 2, I want to break up and talk about the EEA 3, specifically how they differ and what key details you need to take away from this. So the first one I'll talk about is that EEA 3, where we're preparing for the potential rotating outages. So this means that the BA is unable to maintain contingency reserves, and we're seeing that firm load interruption could be imminent. This is something that's issued in real time, and the details in the operations notice will indicate using load as reserves and no firm load interruption at this time. Again, not at this time, it's just preparing, ramping up. You'll see when we go to an EEA 3, the firm load interruption, that's when we're ordering the rotating outages. So if it happens, this is notification identifies that, again, we're going to be ordering those rotating outages. Manual load shedding either has started or is going to be starting soon. And then I do want to point out that those firm load shed operating instructions are going to be sent via a blast call. And because of the nature of this EEA, it's issued in that real time. So those are the key details from the EEA 3 firm load interruption. Again, here in a moment, I'll have an example that we can walk through so you can kind of see what that looks like as we issue it. But before we get there, I did just want to wrap up for this EEAs. Something I know I was thinking about and I wanted to make sure we answered is, how do we know when an EEA ends, or can there be several? And the answer to that is yes, you'll know when it ends. So it can either be canceled or terminated. It just depends on the nature. In fact, I have here on the screen for you an EEA 0, which is that termination. And it's just stating that, yes, we are good to go back. So we are requesting that end of the EEA. And then likewise, there could be several EEAs at one time. It just depends on that situation of the event. However, there's that exception that only an EEA watch should be in effect at any time. So that's the only one that will just be its own separate, but the other ones you could have multiple. Now, before we go into the example together, I did just want to stop and ask a polling question just to kind of see where folks are at, and I opened it. And the polling question is, true or false, flex alerts are only for the summer? So I'm seeing people come in very strongly on this. It looks like false is the strong answer right now. We'll still give some time. Perfect. We have about 5 seconds left if you haven't got your vote in yet. Okay, perfect. And I'll show those results. So yes, correct. Everyone, it is false. Again, you may be familiar with it because that is hand in hand with our summer readiness. However, in the possibility that we do go through an extreme winter event again, or depending on what happens as it gets colder, we could utilize flex alerts for a winter event as well. Good job. So now that we walked through the EEA levels, I want to show you an example, kind of starting from the beginning. I'll lay out a scenario, and then I'll show you what it could look like from the different events, and then we'll stop for questions based off kind of what we go over right now. So for this scenario, just laying the groundwork for everyone, the 7-day outlook is indicating record low temperatures across the western U.S., very similar to what we saw in earlier of this year over the Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. You'll notice that our BA peak load forecast is 50,000 megawatts. The CAISO RA capacity is below the forecasted load. The rest of the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, WEC, is reporting potential record high loads. And then there's no transmission or generation outages at this time. So that's our scenario, and now let's walk through, as we get closer to this event, what that looks like and some examples. So the first thing you'll see, let's say we're 7 days out to the 2-day out process. These are some things that the CAISO BA actions include but aren't limited to. We could issue an extreme weather bulletin, and I have linked here the news releases that are on our website. So we could alert customers that this is happening or something is on the horizon. You'll also see that we have resources, so really utilizing the 7-day outlook graph on our website. I have listed here as well, and I believe Nat will put a link in the chat if you wanted to look at today's outlook. And that's just going to give you information on the load forecast and the resource adequacy capacity trends. The next thing that could happen, again, depends. We're monitoring, we're assessing operationally. We could issue an RMO, the restricted maintenance operation, depending on what we're finding. And then that last action is we're going to be coordinating. Again, remember on the emergency playbook, you saw a list of folks that we're going to be reaching out to. So some include the California water agencies. Maybe we're reaching out to other BAs to see their forecasted conditions and to make sure that we're all getting prepared as we move closer to this event. So now in this scenario, we're 1 day out. So ideally, again, we talked about this on the previous slides, we would issue a flex alert because this is something that would go before or after the day ahead market. It really depends on what we're forecasting. We could issue, if this hasn't already been issued, maybe closer to the event itself, we could issue a restricted maintenance operation. And then let's say that we're 1 day out and the market results are published by 1300 and the market is unable to meet the day ahead forecast load. That's when we're going to issue that EEA watch. It's going to be issued by 1500. As well as our reliability coordinator, RC West, will also issue the EEA watch for the next day as well. And then the last thing, again, because as we've gone through the emergency playbook and we've talked about the different EEA levels, a big thing, a through line through all of this is that coordination. So again, as a scheduling coordinator, if you're seeing things that your resource may not have enough and you need to reach out to us, the earlier you're able to collaborate with us, the better, so we can prepare each other for this. As well as you'll see messaging about the possible export and wheel curtailments, and we'll communicate with the ELRP board. So now let's say hypothetically that the system conditions require us and we have to issue that EEA1. So we'll issue it, and this is again when our system conditions require. We request that RC West issues it as well. We'll have external communications. We'll continuously communicate with our load serving entities and neighboring balancing authorities of conditions, including forecast deficiencies. If there is a potential for us counting that firm load as contingency reserves, then we will provide system status update emails that include the pro rata share estimates by hour to those BAs. Now again, hypothetically, our system is now, the conditions have made it so we have to go into an EEA2. So what that looks like is we need to do the dispatch of several things. You'll see a long list here that includes the RDRR resources, dispatching all unloaded generation above resource adequacy designation. You'll see that any unavailable energy from load, and it's just gonna have a great opportunity also for us to get aligned and make sure that we're arranging for emergency assistance if needed. So that would be more external communication. So if we continue and we just have to now move into an EEA3, the preparing for potential outages, there are a few things that you'll see that we'll start to do. And the first thing is we'll issue that EEA notification. Again, this is just going to be preparing, it's not ordering of it. Here you're going to see a lot of collaboration going to start to occur and continue, making sure that entities capable of interrupting load for rotating outages in 10 minutes are notified and could be needed for contingency occurs to keep the grid stable. And then additionally, again, just want to point out that this is not an instruction to interrupt firm load. Again, this is just preparing. Do not act based on the system status update emails. And then if we continue and we go forward into this, maybe we have to now go to an EEA3, the firm load interruption. So this is going to be when we're ordering. So in the title itself, that ordering rotating outages, it's going to be a separate email from the previous. We're initiating load shedding instructions, and you'll see that it's via a blast call. Additionally, utilities will communicate with their customers and rotate load blocks hourly or in accordance with their respective emergency plans. So you'll notice this is the only EEA level that's going to have that blast call for those operating instructions. So that is a good indicator for you with this specific EEA level. Now, finally, we have gone through it. We are now in the restoration efforts. And I want to point out, as we're going through this, you won't necessarily see every step down. So it doesn't always have to go from EEA3 to 2 to 1 and down and so on. Things could skip depending on the system conditions. But for this example, I did have it just go down by each step so we can see what that would look like. So for restoration, it's just showing that we are ready to restore. So if we go from an EEA3 to a 2, we're saying that operating instructions to restore firm load. From an EEA2 to 1, you'll see that we can dispatch the end for the RDRR resources. In EEA1 to EEA watch, there's no concern serving load and meeting the CR requirements. And then that EEA0 that we talked about previously, continued updates. This we have finished, we're restored, and you'll get that cancellation. So now I'll stop here and I'll open it up for questions. So I know we just covered a lot. We walked through an example, we looked at different EEA levels, and I just want to see if folks have any questions about the material we just covered. So I'll pass it over to you, Nathaniel.
Thank you, Dottie. If you have a question, chat is a great place for it, or hit that raise hand. We'll get them answered. All right, question from Travis. You can unmute yourself and also introduce where you're from. Thanks.
And Travis, if you're asking your question, you may be muted.
Good call, Dottie. I do see an active mic, but I think, yeah, if you have maybe your phone or some other in between, there may be the mute button hit on accident.
And I see that Travis just put his hand down. Travis, if you put your question in the chat, we can also be sure to get it that way. Or if you redial in or try your mic again, please feel free to speak up and we can make sure that we get to your question.
And feel free throughout slides to put questions in the chat because we can get to them at our next stopping point. But looks like we have none so far. Back to you, Dottie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. So now we'll continue on and we're going to talk about how to subscribe and unsubscribe to these notifications. Just to bring awareness, I know especially as we're going into January next year, to make sure that we're all prepared, wrapped up, so when we start getting these, you're in the loop. So we do have a great document on our website. It's the ISO communications method. Specifically, I want to point out on page 2, there is a graph there, or like a chart, and it has a lot of great resources, and it kind of shows you where and what information is going to be posted where. So you'll see here the majority you'll see is on Twitter or social media. All of the notifications are going to be on that M&S, today's Outlook, the ISO mobile app. Again, I'll plug one more time. I'm such a fan of the ISO Today mobile app. It's very user-friendly. It will have all these notifications, a great one-stop shop for you. And then you also see that the EEA3, that last call, is going to be the only one checked for it. And then you'll see on the screen I have also linked to the communication methods themselves. And the way you'll be able to find this and to subscribe, as well as maybe to a few other things like our daily briefing, is if you go to our website and you scroll to the bottom, there's a subscription button that you're able to select. You'll click it and it'll bring you to your options for how much notification you want to be involved with at the ISO. Additionally, if you want it to be included for the EA notifications, you can submit a city ticket with the subject title EA request for addition. And if you'd like to be removed, so maybe you've transitioned roles or it's maybe too much information, you can also submit a city ticket requesting to be removed from that distribution list. Now, I also want to call out to make sure sometimes with these notifications, emails, depending on your organization and the rules, they can go to your junk or trash folders. So just make sure that you're checking that as well to make sure that there's no issue with like the email rules at your organization. So as I mentioned, pretty straightforward, which is nice. The next thing I want to talk to you about is some resources. So in addition to this training, again, I'll update that one slide with that acronym, but in addition to this, I want to give you some more resources so as you go into next year, you can refer back to them, or some light reading if you want to catch up on what happened this year. Specifically, the winter conditions report for January 2024. You'll see here the title on the slide is for summer. That'll also be updated. Don't know how that snuck by me, but we're going into 2025. And the winter condition report for January 2024 is on our website. So this talks about that MLK weekend event in more detail. So it breaks down what happened, what the ISO did, how we coordinated with other entities, and more statistics. If you're someone who likes numbers, this would be a great opportunity for you to review that if you haven't already. I also know that this was reported and shown in the Market Performance and Planning Forum. So those happen quarterly. I believe there was possibly one this morning, but I have it linked here if you wanted to get involved in that forum, as well as a link to your Energy Matters blog. So there's great resources there. They post great content and information that you can store and save and help you keep up to date. Additionally, if you want to really dive in to some details about winter readiness, I have linked here our NERC standards, the RC West procedures, and the CAISO BA procedures. It looks similar, so when we talked about summer readiness, you'll see several of these have been listed. In the addition to the 4120 under the CAISO BA procedures, that gas transmission pipeline system limitations or outages, as well as the 4100, the system operations emergency plan. Those are great resources for you to click through and have some light reading if you'd like to look deeper into it. And then finally for resources, so these were summer readiness trainings that were given this year. They go into detail about a little bit broader of a topic, not just the EEA levels or how to subscribe. They go into performance expectations, they talk about batteries, and then also how we manage interconnections. This is also on our training page, but I wanted to have it easy for you to just click the training in the video yourself, and you can catch up on that. So I want to pause here really quickly before we move into the wrap-up portion of today's training to see if folks have any questions or comments, and I'll pass it over to you, Nat.
Oh, Travis, I was about to say, hey, would you like to, but there's your question in the chat. So yes, let's review this one. Oh, no, don't apologize. This might get you tap it all the time. But yeah, as our experts are thinking about the answer here for this one, I'll just repeat for everybody. For EEA 3, for a site that is currently in a maintenance or is scheduled for that day, be canceled or ended at the time of the EEA is out.
That is a great question, Travis, and thank you. Sorry that your mic would not work. I will open that up to our SMEs. So I know I have Trisha and Brian on the call, if you wanted to comment on that.
So I can kind of answer it on the broader basis. So I think it depends on are we looking at kind of a sudden onset EEA3 situation, or is this something where we saw it coming, kind of a planned event, several days in advance. So if it's something that, let's say we're seeing it's coming and unfolding over several days, we would be looking for scheduled maintenance to be ended before we get to that emergency period. So EEA3 is really actually too late. At an EEA1, we're expecting that all resources are in service. So really when we're issuing the restricted maintenance operation, that's when we're looking to see those outages actually getting rescheduled and moved outside of the period, to the extent that, it's a kind of a planned scheduled outage type situation. And Brian, anything else to add to that?
I think you hit it good there, Tricia, and also existing outages that are currently in the outage state, that could be returned early. So that's, emergency return times, those type of outages that we would review and see if we can get additional resources available back sooner than what was originally scheduled.
Thank you both so much for adding that to that question. And I see, Travis, you said thank you. And again, no worries about the mic issue. Technology can be a fun thing some days. But I currently don't see any other hands raised or questions in the chat. Again, if you have any questions as we're going through the last remaining slides, please feel free to add in. Also, I did just want to call out, and again, when I post and send out these slides, they'll be posted on our training center, as well as I'll email these out to you all after today's training. But for City, we have an enhancement that happened to go in, so you no longer have to submit a City ticket, which is wonderful news to see. So you're able to self-subscribe. I see that Kyle Clayton, who's part of the ISO, put a link in the chat. So I'll include that link in the slides going forward. But that's awesome. That's great news. So now we'll wrap up for today. I know that we talked about a lot of content, and again, these slides are here for you to refer back to, especially with all the different levels that we've gone through. So we reviewed some key takeaways from the winter events together, real scenarios that have occurred. We discussed the emergency playbook. Again, I'll update that acronym and I'll send this out and have it republished. And then we also walked through the different EEA notification levels in detail, as well as we did that scenario and to see what it would look like hypothetically. You learned the process for subscribing and subscribing. It just became even easier for a self-subscribed button, which is incredible. And then we have several resources for you to go back to if you wanted to dive deeper into maybe different procedures as well as other trainings that could be connected to this type of content. So lastly, I did something that we do at the end of training, and Nat will put a link in the chat to the survey, but we always want to continuously improve. I know winter readiness is a topic. Summer readiness is huge and something that we really focus on. But as we go into next year, if you have any feedback on this training and how we can make it even better for next year, please include that in that link. For the instructor, it'll be Dottie. I was your instructor, and then the training course, you'll select other, and it'll be winter readiness. And then finally, I just wanted to say thank you so much. There are several things that you could be doing today with your afternoon. I know everyone is super busy with the holidays coming up and wrapping up the end of the year, but you chose to spend it with us, so I very appreciate you. If you have any questions about this training, please reach out to Customer Readiness. Other questions maybe specific to EEAs or maybe more technical content, you can either submit a city ticket or the Contact Us page. But thank you, and I hope you all have a happy holidays and a good rest of your day.